The doors of the great hall slammed shut behind her before she even understood what was happening. Alena stood alone in the center of the cold stone floor, her heart pounding, as every wolf in the Blackthorn Kingdom stared at her like she was a stain on something sacred. Just moments ago, she had felt the pull, the sudden fire in her chest when King Cade turned his eyes toward her during his coronation. The bond had snapped into place between them like lightning finding the ground. She was his true mate. She was certain of it. But instead of joy, instead of the warmth she had heard mates were supposed to feel, she saw only fury twisting across his face. Cade stood on the raised platform, dressed in black and silver, his crown catching the torchlight. He was breathing hard, his knuckles white against the arm of his throne. When he spoke, his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This cannot be my mate," he said, not looking away from her. "Check again. There must be a mistake." The elder beside him, an old wolf named Garrick, shook his head slowly. "There is no mistake, my king. The bond does not lie. She carries your mark." Alena felt the eyes of the entire hall shift toward her exposed wrist, where a faint silver marking had bloomed the moment the bond ignited. She wanted to hide it, to disappear into the floor, but there was nowhere to go. She had come from one of the lowest-ranking families in the kingdom, daughter of a blacksmith and a seamstress, someone who had never expected to stand this close to a king, let alone be tied to him by fate itself. "I am promised to Princess Ophelia of the Iron Veil," Cade said, his voice rising. "That alliance protects our borders. It protects our people. I will not throw it away because of some twist of the moon's design." Alena lifted her chin, refusing to let her voice shake even though her whole body trembled with humiliation. "I did not ask for this bond either," she said. "I did not come here seeking a crown. Yet here you stand," Cade snapped, "claiming a place beside me that you have no right to." Whispers rippled through the crowd. She heard words like commoner, and unworthy, and disgrace. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated as though she had committed some terrible crime simply by existing, simply by being born the way fate had decided. Cade descended from the platform, his steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing like a war drum. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that the bond inside her chest pulled so hard it almost brought her to her knees. But she held herself steady. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "You will leave this kingdom," Cade said quietly, so only she could hear. "Tonight. If you are seen within these borders again, I will not protect you from what happens next." Her breath caught. "You would banish your own mate." "I would banish a threat to everything I have built," he said. "Whatever the bond wants from me, I refuse it. I choose my kingdom over fate." The words struck her harder than any physical blow could have. She looked into his eyes, searching for even a flicker of doubt, a hint that some part of him regretted what he was about to do. She found nothing but cold resolve. "Fine," she whispered. "I will go. But you will regret this, Cade. Someday, you will understand exactly what you threw away." He said nothing. He simply turned his back to her and walked toward the platform, leaving her standing alone in the hall as guards moved to escort her out. She did not cry, not yet. She would not give any of them that satisfaction. She held her head high as they led her through the corridors, past the whispering nobles, past the mocking glances, out through the great iron gates and into the dark forest beyond. Only when she was far enough away, when the lights of the castle had faded into the black horizon behind her, did she allow the tears to fall. She sank to her knees in the wet grass and let herself grieve everything she had lost in a single evening. A future. A mate. A place she might have belonged. All of it gone in the span of a few cruel sentences. But there was something else, something she had not yet told anyone, something she had barely allowed herself to fully understand. The night before the coronation, before the bond had even been confirmed in front of the court, she and Cade had crossed paths in the garden behind the castle. It had been an accident, a stolen moment neither of them expected. The pull between them had been undeniable even then, wild and unexplainable, and in a moment of weakness neither of them had resisted, they had given in to it completely. She had not known, in that moment, that he was her true mate. She only knew that something ancient and powerful had drawn them together, and that whatever happened next, that single night would change her life forever. Now, walking alone through the dark woods with nothing but the clothes on her back and the ache of humiliation in her chest, she carried something else too. A secret growing quietly inside her, one that Cade knew nothing about, one that would eventually shake his entire kingdom to its foundation. She wrapped her arms around herself as the wind picked up, cold and sharp against her skin. She did not know where she would go. She did not know how she would survive as a rejected mate with no pack, no protection, and no home. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty as she walked further into the darkness, refusing to look back at the castle that had cast her out. She would survive. And one day, King Cade would learn exactly what his cruelty had cost him. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Alena kept walking, her steps steady despite the storm raging inside her heart. Somewhere far behind her, the torches of Blackthorn Castle flickered against the night sky, a symbol of everything she had lost and everything that had been stolen from her in a single, devastating night. She did not know yet how much that night would come to define the rest of her life, but she could feel it, deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning of a story far larger than either of them could have imagined. Alena had been walking for 3 days when she finally reached the edge of the human town called Millhaven, a quiet settlement nestled between rolling hills and a wide river that separated it from the wolf territory she once called home. Her feet were blistered, her stomach empty, and her heart still raw from everything she had lost. But she pressed forward anyway, because she had no other choice. There was no park waiting for her, no home to return to, and no one left who would take her in out of kindness alone. She found a small room above a bakery owned by a kind widow named Margaret, who did not ask too many questions when Alena offered to work in exchange for food and shelter. Margaret seemed to sense that Alena was running from something painful, but she never pried, and for that, Alena was grateful beyond words. The days passed slowly at first, filled with the simple tasks of kneading dough and sweeping floors, tasks that kept her hands busy even as her mind wandered back again and again to the night she had been cast out. It was during her second week in Millhaven that she first felt it, a strange fluttering sensation low in her stomach, subtle but undeniable. She had suspected it before she left Blackthorn, but she had been too consumed by grief and shock to fully accept what her body was telling her. Now, standing in the small kitchen with flour dust in her hands, the truth settled over her with a weight that nearly buckled her knees. She was carrying a child. Cade's child. For a long moment, she simply stood there, staring at nothing, trying to process what this meant for her future. She had already lost everything once. Now she would have to protect not only herself, but a small, innocent life that had not asked to be born into this tangled mess of fate and cruelty. She placed a trembling hand over her stomach and made a silent promise in that moment, one she intended to keep no matter what it cost her. She would protect this child from the man who had rejected them both without ever knowing they existed. She would raise her son or daughter far away from crowns and thrones and the kind of cold politics that valued alliances over the bonds fate itself had created. She would give this child a life built on love, even if it meant hiding forever from the world she had once been forced out of. The months that followed tested Alena in ways she never imagined. She continued working at the bakery, hiding her growing belly under looser clothing for as long as she could manage, careful not to draw suspicion from the townsfolk who might wonder about a young woman alone with no husband and no family nearby. Margaret eventually noticed, of course, but rather than judgment, she offered only quiet support, bringing Alena extra blankets and insisting she rest more as the months wore on. Alena often found herself standing by the window at night, staring out at the distant hills that separated Millhaven from the wolf territories, wondering if Cade ever thought about her, wondering if some part of the bond still tugged at him the way it tugged at her, even now, even after everything. She hated that she still felt anything for him at all. She hated that some small, foolish part of her heart still ached whenever she remembered the warmth of his hands, the sound of his voice before everything turned cruel. But she pushed those feelings down deep, burying them beneath the fierce determination to protect the life growing inside her. The birth came on a stormy night in early spring, with thunder rattling the windows of the small room above the bakery. Margaret stayed by her side through the long, difficult hours, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement as Alena fought through pain unlike anything she had ever experienced. When it was finally over, when the cries of a newborn filled the small room, Alena felt something inside her shift completely, a fierce and overwhelming love unlike anything she had known before. She looked down at her son, small and perfect, his tiny face scrunched up as he cried his first cries into the world. She counted his fingers and toes, marveled at the soft tuft of dark hair on his head, and felt tears streaming down her own face, tears of exhaustion and joy and grief all tangled together. She named him Callum, a name she had chosen months ago during quiet nights of wondering what kind of person her child might become. It was only in the days that followed, as she nursed him and studied his tiny features in the soft morning light, that she noticed something strange. His eyes, when they finally opened fully, held flecks of gold scattered through the brown, a pattern she recognized instantly from stories she had heard growing up, stories about the royal bloodline of Blackthorn and the rare golden markings that had passed down through generations of kings. It was not something common wolves carried. It was a mark of royal blood, unmistakable and impossible to hide from anyone who knew what to look for. Panic gripped her chest the moment she realized what this meant. If anyone from Blackthorn ever saw her son's eyes, they would know immediately who his father was. She thought of the king's warning, the promise that she would not be protected if she ever returned, and wondered with a chill what might happen if word ever reached him that she had given birth to his child. Would he see Callum as a threat to his throne? Would he try to take him away, to raise him within the political games of the castle rather than allow him a normal, peaceful life? Or worse, would he see the child as nothing more than an inconvenient reminder of a bond he had tried so hard to reject? Alena made a decision that night, holding her son close as the storm outside finally began to quiet. She would take a new name for herself, something simple and unremarkable, and she would raise Callum far from anyone who might recognize the markings in his eyes. She would tell no one about his father, not even Margaret, who had already shown her more kindness than she deserved. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer her son would be. She began calling herself Ilona instead of Alena, a small change but enough to create distance from her old life. She kept Callum bundled carefully whenever visitors came to the bakery, always making sure his eyes were not easily seen by strangers. She watched him grow through his first months with a fierce protectiveness that bordered on paranoia, jumping at every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face that passed through town. Margaret noticed her anxiety, of course, but she never pushed for answers, simply offering steady support in whatever way she could. Slowly, over time, Alena allowed herself to breathe a little easier as the months passed without incident, without any sign that anyone from Blackthorn had come searching for her. She began to believe, perhaps foolishly, that she and Callum might actually be safe here, tucked away in this quiet corner of the world where wolves and their politics could not reach them. She built a small life for herself and her son, teaching him to walk in the narrow space behind the bakery, singing him songs at night as she rocked him to sleep, watching with quiet pride as he grew stronger and more curious about the world around him. He had an easy laugh, even as an infant, and a stubborn streak that reminded her painfully of his father, though she tried not to dwell on that comparison too often. She wanted Callum to become his own person, not a shadow of the man who had rejected them both before he even knew they existed. But even as she built this new life, she could not fully escape the shadow of Blackthorn. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, she found herself thinking about Cade, wondering if he had married the princess he had chosen over her, wondering if he ever felt even a flicker of doubt about the choice he had made. She told herself it did not matter anymore. She told herself she had moved on completely, that her heart no longer ached for a man who had cast her aside without a second thought. But deep down, in the quiet corners of her mind she rarely allowed herself to visit, she knew the truth was more complicated than that. The bond between true mates was not something easily severed, even when one side rejected it completely. She still felt the pull sometimes, faint but persistent, a quiet reminder that somewhere out there, Cade existed, living his life, ruling his kingdom, completely unaware that he had a son with eyes the color of gold and shadow, eyes that marked him as an heir to a throne he would likely never know existed. Alena pushed those thoughts away as best she could, focusing instead on the small joys of raising Callum, on watching him grow day by day into a bright, curious child full of laughter and energy. She told herself that this quiet life, away from crowns and cruelty, was enough. She told herself that she did not need Cade, that she and her son could build a beautiful life together without him. But fate, as she would soon learn, rarely allowed the past to stay buried forever. Somewhere across the hills, in the halls of Blackthorn Castle, changes were already stirring, changes that would eventually send ripples all the way to the quiet bakery in Millhaven, changes that would test everything Alena had built to protect her son from the world she had left behind. 3 years passed inside the walls of Blackthorn Castle, and King Cade sat upon his throne feeling like a stranger inside his own body. The marriage to Princess Ophelia had gone forward exactly as planned, sealed with grand ceremonies and promises of unity between two powerful territories. Yet from the very first night, something had felt wrong, hollow in a way Cade could not explain to anyone, least of all himself. The alliance he had sacrificed everything to protect began crumbling almost immediately, not from outside threats, but from within his own marriage. Ophelia had never wanted him, not truly. She had wanted his throne, his resources, and the protection his kingdom offered against rivals who threatened her family's territory. Within the first year, Cade discovered she had been secretly funneling information to her father's council, sharing details about Blackthorn's defenses and treasury in exchange for continued support for her own political ambitions. The betrayal had cut deep, not because he loved her, he never had, but because it confirmed something he had refused to admit to himself since the night he banished Alena. He had thrown away a true bond, a connection fate itself had chosen for him, in favor of an alliance built entirely on lies and self-interest. The physical toll came gradually at first, then all at once. Cade began experiencing strange weaknesses that no healer in the castle could explain. His strength, once unmatched among the wolves of his generation, began to falter during training sessions that should have been effortless. He suffered from restless nights plagued by phantom sensations, a persistent ache in his chest that felt eerily similar to the moment he had first felt the mate bond ignite years ago. Sometimes, in the depth of sleep, he swore he could catch the faintest trace of a scent he recognized instantly but could never place upon waking, something warm and familiar that left him disoriented and unsettled for hours afterward. Garrick, the elder who had first confirmed the bond between Cade and Alena, watched his king's decline with growing concern. He had served 3 generations of Blackthorn rulers and understood the old laws of mate bonds better than anyone else in the kingdom. One evening, as Cade sat alone in his study staring blankly at a stack of unread reports, Garrick finally spoke the words he had been holding back for years. "You are weakening, my king, because you severed something that was never meant to be severed," Garrick said quietly. "The bond does not simply disappear because you reject it. It lingers, and when left unresolved, it drains the very strength it was meant to give you." Cade's jaw tightened. "I made the right decision for this kingdom." "Did you?" Garrick asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Look around you, my king. Your marriage has crumbled. Your strength continues to fade. Your borders remain no safer than they were before, perhaps even less so now that Ophelia's family holds secrets they should never have been given. Tell me honestly, what exactly did you gain by casting aside your true mate?" Cade said nothing for a long moment, staring at the flickering candle on his desk. He thought about Alena more often than he cared to admit, especially in these last few months as his health continued to decline. He remembered her defiance in the Great Hall, the way she had refused to cower even as he humiliated her in front of the entire court. He remembered the warmth of the bond before he had crushed it beneath his own pride and fear. "Even if I wanted to fix this," Cade finally said, his voice rough, "I have no idea where she went. She could be anywhere by now. She could have found another mate. She could hate me too much to ever accept me again, even if I found her." Garrick studied him carefully before speaking again. "There have been whispers, my king, from traders passing through the border towns. Whispers of a woman living quietly near Millhaven, raising a young son alone. A woman who keeps to herself, who never speaks of the child's father, who seems to guard her privacy with unusual intensity for someone with nothing to hide." Cade's head snapped up, his heart suddenly pounding in a way it had not in years. "A son. The details are unclear," Garrick admitted. "But something about the rumors caught my attention. It might be nothing. It might simply be a human woman living an ordinary life. But if there is even a small chance it could be her, perhaps it is worth investigating quietly, without drawing attention to yourself or the kingdom." For the first time in 3 years, Cade felt something stir inside him that resembled hope, though he barely recognized the feeling anymore after so long buried beneath guilt and regret. He knew he could not simply march into Millhaven with a full royal procession, not without risking exposure and scandal that could further destabilize his already fragile political standing. Ophelia's family would use any excuse to seize more control over Blackthorn's territory, and rumors of an abandoned mate with a child would provide exactly the kind of scandal they needed to justify further interference. "I will go myself," Kate said finally, standing from his chair with new determination. Quietly. Without guards, without announcing my intentions. If it is nothing, then nothing is lost. But if it is her. He did not finish the sentence, unable to fully articulate the mixture of fear and desperate hope building inside his chest. Garrick nodded slowly, understanding without needing further explanation. "Be careful, my king," Garrick said. "If it is truly her, remember that words alone will not undo 3 years of pain. Actions will need to prove what promises cannot." Kate barely heard the warning, his mind already racing ahead to Millhaven, to the possibility that Alena might still be alive, might still be within reach after all this time. He spent the following days preparing quietly for the journey, informing only Garrick and a handful of trusted guards who would maintain order in the castle during his absence. He dressed simply, discarding his usual royal attire for plain traveling clothes that would allow him to move through human towns without drawing unwanted attention. The journey to Millhaven took nearly a week, traveling mostly at night to avoid recognition, staying in modest inns along the way rather than announcing his presence to local wolf packs who might recognize their kin and spread word of his location. With each passing day, the strange weakness in his body seemed to lessen slightly, replaced instead by a nervous energy he had not felt since he was a much younger wolf, uncertain of his place in the world. When he finally arrived at the edge of Millhaven, he stood for a long moment at the top of the hill overlooking the small town, taking in the quiet rooftops and winding streets below. Somewhere down there, if the rumors were true, Alena might be living an entirely different life than the one she would have had if he had accepted her all those years ago. He wondered what she looked like now, whether she had changed, whether she still carried the same fierce defiance she had shown him in the great hall before everything fell apart. He made his way carefully into town, keeping his senses sharp for any trace of her familiar scent among the unfamiliar mix of human smells that filled the streets. Bread baking, wood smoke, river water, none of it gave him any clear indication of where she might be. He spent the better part of 2 days wandering through the town, asking careful, indirect questions of local shopkeepers, trying to gather information without revealing too much about himself or his true purpose. It was on the 3rd day, as he passed by a small bakery near the edge of town, that he caught it. A scent so faint it might have gone unnoticed by anyone without a wolf's heightened senses, but unmistakable to him nonetheless. It carried traces of Alena, unmistakably hers, mixed with something else entirely, something that made his entire body go rigid with shock. Royal blood. His own royal blood, carried on a scent that could only belong to a child. His heart pounded violently as he stood frozen outside the bakery, staring at the modest wooden building with its warm lights glowing from inside. He forced himself to move closer, drawn by an instinct stronger than caution, stronger than the fear that had kept him paralyzed for 3 long years. Through the window, he caught his first glimpse of her in all that time. Alena stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back simply, flour dusting her apron as she handed a loaf of bread to an elderly customer. She looked different, older in the subtle ways that time changes a person, but unmistakably her, unmistakably the woman who had once stood defiant before his throne. And beside her, holding tightly to the hem of her apron, stood a small boy who could not have been more than 3 years old. Kate's breath caught in his throat as the boy turned slightly, giving him a clear view of his face for just a brief moment. Dark hair, much like his own. A stubborn set to his small jaw that reminded Kate instantly of himself as a child. And eyes, when the boy glanced up toward his mother, that carried unmistakable flecks of gold woven through the brown, the exact same rare marking that had passed down through generations of Blackthorn's royal bloodline. There was no mistaking it. This was his son. The realization crashed into him with the force of a physical blow, staggering him backward a step as 3 years of guilt, shock, and desperate longing collided all at once inside his chest. He had a son. Alena had given birth to his child, had raised him alone in this quiet town, had kept this enormous truth hidden away while he remained completely oblivious back in Blackthorn, consumed by his own failing marriage and fading strength. He stood frozen outside the bakery for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, unable to fully process the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Every instinct told him to burst through the door immediately, to demand answers, to claim his son and beg Elena's forgiveness in the same breath. But some deeper wisdom, perhaps the same wisdom Garrick had tried to instill in him before he left, held him back. He could not simply demand anything from her, not after everything he had done. He had cast her out with cruel words and colder actions, had denied the bond fate itself had given them, had left her to face pregnancy and childbirth entirely alone in a strange town far from everything familiar. Whatever right he might have once had to walk into her life and claim a place there, he had forfeited the moment he chose his throne over her. He watched through the window a moment longer, memorizing the way she smiled gently at her son, the way the boy laughed at something she said, a bright, easy sound that carried faintly through the glass. This was the life she had built without him, a life that seemed peaceful despite everything she must have endured to create it. He wondered, with a fresh wave of guilt, whether he had any right at all to disrupt it now, 3 years too late. But he also knew, standing there in the quiet evening air outside the small bakery, that he could not simply walk away again. Not now that he knew the truth. Not now that he had seen his son's face, had caught the unmistakable scent of his own blood carried within that small, innocent body. Whatever it cost him, whatever battles he would need to fight against his own counsel, against Ophelia's scheming family, against Elena's rightful anger and distrust, he would fight them all. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, and finally stepped toward the bakery door, uncertain of exactly what he would say, but certain of one thing above all else. He would not leave Millhaven without speaking to her, without at least trying to explain, without giving her the chance to decide whether there was any room left in her life, in their son's life, for the man who had once cast them both aside. The bell above the door chimed softly as he pushed it open, and Elena's head turned instinctively toward the sound, her welcoming smile still in place for what she assumed would be another ordinary customer. The moment her eyes met his, however, that smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression of pure shock as recognition crashed over her features. Behind her, the small boy looked up curiously at the stranger who had suddenly caused his mother's entire body to go rigid with tension. For a long, suspended moment, no one in the small bakery said a single word, the air thick with 3 years of unspoken pain, unresolved bonds, and a truth that could no longer remain hidden. Elena's hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter, her mind racing through a dozen possibilities at once, none of them good. 3 years of careful hiding, of building a quiet life far from the politics and cruelty of Blackthorn, and now Kate stood right there in front of her, in the very bakery where she had rebuilt everything from nothing. She instinctively stepped sideways, putting herself between him and Callum, a fierce protectiveness overriding every other emotion crashing through her at once. "Get away from us," she said, her voice low and sharp, carrying a warning that left no room for misunderstanding. Cade held up both hands slowly, showing he meant no threat, though his eyes never left the small boy peeking curiously from behind Elena's legs. "Elena, please. I only want to talk." "You lost that right 3 years ago," she snapped, though her voice wavered slightly, betraying the storm of emotions raging beneath her composed exterior. "You made yourself very clear that night. You told me you would not protect me. You told me to leave and never come back." "I know what I said," Cade replied, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard from him before, something that sounded dangerously close to genuine regret. "I was wrong. I have spent every day since that night regretting the choice I made, though I never understood exactly how wrong I had been until this very moment." Margaret appeared from the back room at that moment, drawn by the tension in the air, her eyes immediately narrowing with suspicion as she took in the unfamiliar man standing near the door. "Is everything all right, Ilona?" she asked carefully, using the name Elena had adopted since arriving in Millhaven. "Everything is fine, Margaret," Elena said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "This man was just leaving." "I am not leaving," Kate said firmly, though he kept his voice gentle, clearly trying not to frighten the child watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Not until we talk. Please, Elena. 5 minutes. That is all I ask." Margaret glanced between the two of them, sensing the complicated history hanging thick in the air, before quietly retreating to give them privacy while still remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Elena hesitated, her protective instinct warring against a small, treacherous part of her that had wondered for years what she would say to Cade if she ever saw him again. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight. 5 minutes. Outside. Not here. She turned to Callum, kneeling down to his level and speaking softly. Stay with Margaret for a moment, sweetheart. I will be right back. Callum nodded, though his gaze remained fixed curiously on the stranger by the door, something about the man's presence clearly capturing his young attention in a way he could not fully understand yet. Alena led Kate outside into the cool evening air, walking a short distance from the bakery before turning to face him with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Talk, she said simply. Kate took a steadying breath, searching for the right words after years of imagining this moment without ever truly preparing for how difficult it would be. I did not know, he began. I swear to you, Alena, I had no idea you were carrying our child when I sent you away. If I had known, would it have changed anything? Alena interrupted, her voice sharp with 3 years of buried anger finally finding release. Would you have kept me around simply because I was carrying an heir, while still treating me as beneath you? Or would you have found some way to take the child and cast me aside regardless? Kate flinched at the accusation, though he could not entirely deny that the fear behind her words held some validity given how he had behaved that night in the Great Hall. I do not know what I would have done then, he admitted honestly. I was a different person, blinded by pride and fear about what accepting you would mean for the alliance I thought I needed to protect my kingdom. But that alliance has already crumbled regardless. Ophelia betrayed me, shared secrets with her family that nearly cost Blackthorn everything I was trying to protect. Everything I sacrificed you for was built on nothing but lies. Elena's expression remained guarded, though something flickered behind her eyes at this revelation. That does not undo what you did to me, she said quietly. You humiliated me in front of your entire court. You called me unworthy, a threat to your throne. You sent me away with nothing, knowing full well that as your rejected mate, I would carry both physical and emotional wounds that might never fully heal. I know, Kate said, his voice breaking slightly under the weight of his own guilt. I have felt those same wounds every single day since you left, though I did not fully understand what I was feeling until recently. My strength has been fading for years, Alena. My counsel believes it is connected to the severed bond, that rejecting you the way I did has been slowly weakening me from within. Elena's jaw tightened, though whether from sympathy or lingering anger, even she could not fully determine in that moment. So you came here because you are weak, she said flatly, not because you actually care about the son you did not even know existed until you caught his scent through a window. That is not fair, Kate said, though he understood immediately why she might believe it. Yes, my weakening strength led me to investigate rumors that eventually brought me here. But the moment I saw him, Alena, the moment I understood he was truly mine, everything changed. I am not here because of some selfish desire to restore my own power. I am here because I have a son I never knew existed, and I refuse to walk away now that I know the truth. Alena studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of the same cold cruelty she had witnessed that terrible night 3 years ago. She found something different now, an exhaustion and vulnerability she had never seen from him before, a rawness that suggested genuine transformation rather than simple desperation. His name is Callum, she said finally, her voice softening slightly despite herself. He has never known anything about you. He has never asked about a father because he has never known to wonder. I built this life for him specifically to keep him safe from the very world you represent, from crowns and politics and the kind of cruelty that nearly destroyed me. I understand, Kate said quietly. And I am not asking you to hand him over to me, or to immediately trust that everything will simply return to how it might have been if I had made different choices 3 years ago. I know I have not earned that trust. I know actions will need to prove whatever words I offer tonight. But please, Alena, do not shut me out completely without giving me any chance to try. Alena remained silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkening horizon beyond the edge of town, wrestling with 3 years of careful walls she had built around her heart, walls designed specifically to protect both herself and her son from exactly this kind of complicated, painful reunion. Part of her wanted desperately to send him away, to protect the peaceful life she had built without him. But another part of her, a part she had tried hard to suppress, remembered the way the bond had felt before everything turned cruel, remembered that beneath the crown and the political pressures, there had once been a connection that felt genuinely real. "If you truly want to try," she said finally, choosing her words carefully, "it will not be simple. You cannot expect immediate forgiveness, and you certainly cannot expect to simply take Callum back to Blackthorn as though the last 3 years never happened. If you are serious about this, you will need to prove it slowly, through actions, exactly as you said." Cade nodded eagerly, relief washing visibly across his features. "I understand completely. Whatever it takes, Alena. I will not push for more than you are willing to give." "There is something else you should understand," Alena continued, her expression turning serious once more. "If word ever reaches your council, or worse, Ophelia's family, about Callum's existence, they will see him as either a valuable political asset to be controlled, or a dangerous threat to be eliminated depending on their own selfish interests. I have spent 3 years protecting him from exactly that kind of danger. I will not allow anything to threaten his safety now, regardless of how this conversation between us unfolds. I will protect him," Cade said firmly, a fierce determination settling into his voice that Alena recognized instantly as genuine. "Whatever threats emerge, whatever battles I need to fight within my own court, I will ensure Callum remains safe. That much I can promise you without hesitation." They stood together in the cooling evening air for a long moment, the weight of 3 years of separation and pain hanging between them, though something had shifted slightly, some small crack forming in the walls Alena had built so carefully around her heart. She did not fully trust him yet, perhaps she never would completely trust him again after everything that had happened. But for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that things might not need to remain broken forever. "You should meet him properly," she said finally, surprising herself with the words even as she spoke them. "Not tonight. Not as his father, not yet. But perhaps, if you are willing to be patient, as a friend of mine visiting from out of town. Let him get to know you slowly, without the weight of everything else complicating things before he is old enough to understand." Cade's eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like relief and gratitude combined, an expression Alena had never witnessed from the proud, cold king who had once cast her aside so cruelly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise you, Alena, I will not take this chance for granted." As they walked back toward the bakery together, the tension between them had not fully dissolved. Years of pain and betrayal could not simply vanish in a single conversation. But something new had begun to take root in the space between them, fragile and uncertain, yet undeniably present. Whatever challenges awaited them in the months ahead, from Cade's counsel, from Ophelia's scheming family, from the difficult work of rebuilding trust between two people who had been so deeply wounded by each other, they would face them one careful step at a time. Months passed slowly in Millhaven as Cade began the long, careful process of earning his way back into Elena's trust. He traveled from Blackthorn as often as his duties allowed, always arriving quietly, always respecting the boundaries Alena had set for him. He introduced himself to Callum simply as a friend, and slowly, over weeks that turned into months, the young boy began looking forward to his visits with genuine excitement, unaware of the deeper truth behind their connection. Cade brought small carved wooden animals during his visits, sitting patiently on the floor of the bakery's back room while Callum arranged them into elaborate imaginary battles, laughing freely in a way that made something in Cade's chest ache with a mixture of joy and grief for the years he had already missed. He learned the rhythm of his son's laughter, the particular way he scrunched his nose when concentrating hard on a task, the stubborn insistence he showed whenever he wanted to do something entirely on his own without help. Alena watched these interactions carefully at first, still guarded, still uncertain whether this transformation in Cade was genuine or simply a temporary performance driven by guilt and desperation. But as the months passed, she began noticing subtle changes that convinced her something real was happening. Cade never pushed for more than she offered. He never demanded acknowledgement as Callum's father, never rushed the process despite what must have been an overwhelming desire to claim his son fully and immediately. He simply showed up, again and again, patient and steady, proving through consistent action exactly what he had promised that first evening outside the bakery. Back in Blackthorn, however, trouble was brewing that threatened to unravel everything Cade had worked so carefully to rebuild. Rumors had begun circulating among the nobility about the king's frequent, unexplained absences from the castle. Ophelia's family, sensing an opportunity to further destabilize Cade's already weakened position, began quietly investigating these absences, eventually uncovering fragments of the truth that pointed toward Millhaven and the possibility of a hidden heir. Garrick brought the troubling news to Kate during one of his brief returns to the castle, his expression grave as he explained the growing danger. "They know something, my king," Garrick said. "Not everything yet, but enough to be dangerous. If they discover the full truth about your son before you are prepared to protect him properly, they will use this information as a weapon, either to seize control of the boy themselves or to eliminate him entirely as a threat to Ophelia's own political ambitions within your court." Kate's blood ran cold at the thought of Callum facing any danger because of political scheming he had no part in creating. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "You must act decisively, and soon," Garrick advised. "Continuing to hide the truth only gives your enemies more time to uncover it themselves and use it against you. Perhaps it is time to face this challenge directly, to publicly claim Alena and your son before anyone else can twist the situation into something dangerous." Kate knew Garrick was right, though the thought of exposing Alena and Callum to the full weight of Blackthorn's political scrutiny filled him with dread. He traveled back to Millhaven immediately, finding Alena in the small garden behind the bakery where she often spent quiet evenings watching Callum play among the flower beds. "There is danger," Kate said without preamble, explaining quickly everything Garrick had uncovered about Ophelia's family and their growing suspicions. Elena's face paled as she listened, her protective instincts flaring immediately at the thought of her son facing any threat from the political world she had worked so hard to shield him from. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice tight with fear she could not fully hide. "I believe we need to face this directly," Kate said carefully. "If we continue hiding, we only give them more opportunity to strike first, on their own terms, when we are least prepared. But if we act fast, if I publicly claim you both before the entire court, we control the situation rather than allowing our enemies to control it for us." Alena hesitated, the weight of such a decision settling heavily upon her. Publicly claiming their bond would mean exposing Callum to the full reality of his royal heritage, would mean giving up the quiet, protected life she had built so carefully over the past 3 years. But she also understood, watching her son play innocently among the flowers, unaware of the danger circling closer with each passing day, that hiding was no longer a viable option either. "If we do this," she said finally, "you must promise me that Callum's safety comes before any political consideration, before any alliance, before anything else your counsel might demand of you." "I promise," Kate said immediately, without hesitation. "Nothing matters more to me now than protecting both of you. I have already lost 3 years I can never reclaim. I will not lose either of you again." They traveled back to Blackthorn together as a family for the first time, Callum excited by the journey despite not fully understanding its significance, chattering happily about the passing scenery while Alena remained tense with worry throughout the trip. Upon arriving at the castle, Cade wasted no time calling an emergency session of his full council, standing before them with Alena and Callum by his side, refusing to hide any longer behind careful secrecy. "I have called you here to address rumors that have been circulating regarding my absences from court," Cade began, his voice steady and commanding despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I will not allow half-truths and dangerous speculation to threaten the safety of my family. This is Alena, my true mate, whom I wrongfully rejected 3 years ago out of fear and misguided pride. And this is our son, Callum, my rightful heir." Gasps rippled through the assembled council members, some expressions filled with genuine shock, others calculating quickly how this revelation might affect their own political standing. Ophelia's father stepped forward immediately, his face twisted with barely contained fury at having his family's schemes exposed so directly. "This changes everything," the older wolf snarled. "Your marriage to my daughter created an alliance this kingdom depends upon. You cannot simply discard that arrangement because of some inconvenient truth about a rejected mate." "The alliance was already broken," Cade replied firmly, "by your own daughter's betrayal, sharing our kingdom's secrets with your family for her own political gain. I have proof of these actions, evidence I have kept quiet until now out of respect for the alliance we once shared. But I will not allow that broken alliance to threaten the safety of my true mate or my son any longer." The council chamber fell into stunned silence as Cade laid out the evidence of Ophelia's betrayal clearly and methodically, evidence Garrick had helped him compile carefully over the past several months in preparation for exactly this confrontation. Several council members who had previously supported the alliance with Ophelia's family now shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the serious implications of what Cade had just revealed. "I am formally ending my marriage to Ophelia," Cade announced family, "on the grounds of proven betrayal against this kingdom's interest. And I am publicly and permanently accepting Alena as my true mate, and Callum as my rightful heir, regardless of any political consequences that decision might bring." Alena stood beside him throughout this declaration, her hand finding Callum's small shoulder protectively as she watched years of careful hiding transform into open, public acknowledgement before the entire court. She felt fear, certainly, uncertain how this dramatic shift might affect their future, but she also felt something else entirely new taking root within her chest, a cautious hope that perhaps, finally, they might build something real and lasting together. The weeks that followed brought significant upheaval to Blackthorn's political landscape, as Ophelia's family retreated in disgrace, their schemes fully exposed before the entire council. Other nobles who had quietly supported the alliance out of fear rather than genuine loyalty began shifting their support toward Cade's new, transparent approach to leadership, impressed by his willingness to prioritize honesty and protection of his family over convenient political arrangements. Cade worked tirelessly to reform the very systems that had once justified his cruel treatment of Alena, establishing new protections within Blackthorn's laws that recognized mate bonds as sacred regardless of social status or political convenience. He appointed advisors who valued genuine partnership over calculated alliances, slowly rebuilding a kingdom founded on principles he wished he had understood from the very beginning of his reign. Alena, meanwhile, settled gradually into her new role, though she insisted on maintaining certain aspects of the life she had built in Millhaven, keeping Margaret as a close friend and frequent visitor to the castle, ensuring Callum grew up understanding both the privileges of his royal heritage and the humble values instilled in him during his early years away from the throne. She watched carefully as Cade continued proving himself day after day, not through grand gestures or empty promises, but through consistent, patient actions that gradually rebuilt the trust he had shattered 3 years earlier. Callum grew quickly into his role as heir, his golden-flecked eyes no longer a secret to be hidden but a proud symbol of his royal lineage, openly displayed and celebrated throughout the kingdom. He possessed his father's strength and determination, tempered by his mother's fierce compassion and resilience, qualities that promised a future ruler capable of leading with both power and genuine wisdom. One evening, standing together on the castle balcony overlooking the kingdom that had once cast her out so cruelly, Alena felt Cade's hand slip gently into hers, a gesture that could have once ignited fear and uncertainty within her, but now brought only quiet comfort and hard-earned trust. "I know I can never fully make up for the pain I caused you," Cade said softly, watching Callum play in the courtyard below with a group of other children from the castle. "But I promise you, every single day, I will continue trying." Alena squeezed his hand gently, watching their son laugh freely below them, safe and secure in a kingdom that had finally learned to embrace the true bonds fate had always intended. "I know," she said quietly. "And that is more than enough." Together, they watched the sun set over Blackthorn, a kingdom transformed not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through the simple, powerful act of choosing love and honesty over pride and fear, finally building the future that fate had intended for them from the very beginning.